The rain fell in steady sheets across the military compound, each droplet carrying with it the weight of 1,000 unspoken judgments. In the center of the training ground stood a figure that had become the subject of countless whispered conversations and barely concealed snickers. The recruits gathered under the covered walkways, their eyes fixed on the lone woman who continued her training routine despite the downpour, despite the mocking laughter that echoed from behind concrete walls, despite everything. Her name was Elena Vasquez, though most knew her only by the derision in their voices when they spoke of the girl who thinks she can make it. At 23, she carried herself with a quiet intensity that unnerved those who mistook silence for weakness. The black mark tattooed on her left shoulder blade, a Talon gripping a broken chain, remained hidden beneath her training uniform, but its significance burned in her memory like a brand of transformation. The mockery had begun on her first day at the elite military training facility. "Look what they're letting in now," had been the first comment, followed by a chorus of agreement from the male-dominated ranks. The instructors, seasoned veterans who had seen countless recruits come and go, regarded her with the kind of skeptical indifference reserved for those they expected to wash out within the first week. Physical standards were lowered for no one here, they reminded everyone daily. This wasn't a place for social experiments or political correctness, this was where warriors were forged or broken. Elena understood this completely. She had not come here seeking accommodation or special treatment. She had come here to destroy something, not the enemy, not her competition, but the weak version of herself that had accepted limitations for far too long. Every sneer, every dismissive gesture, every patronizing comment served only to fuel the fire that had been burning within her since childhood. The transformation had not begun at the military compound. It had started years earlier, in a small apartment where a young girl had watched her father return from deployment changed, broken, carrying wounds that went far deeper than the visible scars on his body. She had seen what war could do to a person, but, more importantly, she had witnessed what surrendering to that damage could accomplish. Her father had allowed his trauma to define him, to limit him, to make him smaller than the man who had left for service. Elena had made a different choice. Where her father had seen defeat, she chose to see instruction. Where he had found reasons to retreat, she discovered motivation to advance. The day she turned 18, she walked into the recruitment office not as someone seeking to follow in family footsteps, but as someone determined to transcend them entirely. The weak girl who had grown up watching strength crumble would die, and something harder, more resilient, would take her place. The physical training was brutal by design. 5 o'clock reveille, followed by a 10-mile run, obstacle courses that seemed designed by sadists, and combat training that left everyone bloodied and exhausted. Elena excelled at none of it initially. Her times were mediocre, her technique rough, her endurance adequate but unremarkable. What set her apart was not natural ability but an almost supernatural persistence. When others collapsed, she continued. When others complained, she remained silent. When others made excuses, she found solutions. The mocking intensified as weeks passed and she refused to quit. "She's trying to prove something," became a common refrain, spoken with the kind of knowing condescension that military environments often cultivate. The assumption was that her persistence stemmed from stubborn pride rather than genuine transformation. They could not understand that for Elena, this was not about proving anything to them, it was about killing the part of herself that had ever cared what they thought. The other recruits formed their hierarchies and allegiances quickly. Elena remained apart, not from arrogance but from necessity. She understood that the journey she was undertaking required a level of internal focus that social connections would only complicate. During mealtimes, while others bonded over shared complaints and war stories, she studied training manuals and tactical documents. While others spent their limited free time writing letters home or playing cards, she practiced hand-to-hand combat techniques until muscle memory replaced conscious thought. This isolation bred resentment among some of the other recruits. Her dedication was interpreted as superiority, her silence as judgment. Small acts of sabotage began, equipment mysteriously moved or damaged, assignments altered to exclude her, training partnerships that somehow never materialized when she needed them. Elena absorbed these petty cruelties without complaint or retaliation, understanding that her response to adversity was being measured by eyes that would determine her future. 3 months into training, during a particularly challenging field exercise, the true test arrived. The scenario involved a simulated rescue mission behind enemy lines, with recruits divided into teams of 6. Elena found herself assigned to a group that had explicitly requested she be placed elsewhere. The team leader, a decorated sergeant named Marcus Webb, made no attempt to hide his displeasure with the arrangement. "Just try to keep up and don't get us all killed," Webb instructed as they prepared for the exercise. The others laughed, but Elena simply nodded and checked her equipment. She had learned that actions spoke in languages that words could never match. The mission went wrong from the beginning. Poor intelligence, unexpected obstacles, and a series of tactical errors by the team leadership created a cascade of problems that threatened to result in complete failure. As the situation deteriorated, Elena found herself in the position she had been unconsciously preparing for since arriving at the compound. The moment when the weak version of herself would have deferred to authority, accepted defeat, and blamed external circumstances for failure. Instead, she stepped forward and quietly presented an alternative strategy that addressed the tactical problems the team faced. Webb, desperate and facing the humiliation of leading his team to obvious defeat, reluctantly agreed to let her try. What followed was a masterclass in adaptive leadership and tactical thinking. Elena navigated the team through a series of maneuvers that not only completed the mission objectives but did so with a precision and efficiency that caught the attention of the observing instructors. The success was undeniable, but the reaction was predictable. "Lucky break" became the common explanation. "Anyone could have done that" was another favorite. The implication was that Elena's contribution had been minimal, that the team's success had occurred in spite of her presence rather than because of it. She listened to these explanations without comment, understanding that the truth of what had happened was less important than what people needed to believe about it. But someone had been watching more carefully. General Patricia Morrison, a legendary figure in military circles, had been observing the field exercises as part of her periodic assessment of the training program. Morrison was known for her ability to identify exceptional potential in unexpected packages, and something about Elena's performance had captured her attention. More specifically, something about the way Elena handled both success and the dismissal of that success had impressed her. The general requested Elena's file and spent considerable time reviewing not just her performance metrics, which were steadily improving, but the psychological evaluations and instructor notes that painted a picture of someone undergoing a profound internal transformation. Morrison had seen thousands of recruits pass through various training programs, and she understood the difference between someone trying to prove themselves to others and someone systematically rebuilding themselves from the foundation up. The call came on a Tuesday evening. Elena was summoned to report to the administration building, an unusual request that immediately sparked speculation among the other recruits. Some assumed she was being disciplined for some unknown infraction. Others suggested she was finally being counseled out of the program. The possibility that she was being recognized for exceptional performance was not seriously considered by anyone except Elena herself. General Morrison's office was spartanly decorated, containing only the essential furniture and a few carefully chosen military decorations that spoke to a career of distinguished service. The general herself was a woman in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun and eyes that seemed to catalog and evaluate everything they encountered. She gestured for Elena to take a seat and then studied her in silence for several long moments. "Tell me about the mark," Morrison said finally, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Elena understood immediately that the general was referring to the tattoo on her shoulder blade, the black Talon gripping the broken chain that she had gotten 6 months before enlisting. The design was not visible in her current uniform, which meant that Morrison had either seen it during medical examinations or had access to detailed physical documentation that most people never reviewed. Either way, the question indicated a level of attention to her case that Elena had not expected. "It represents a choice, ma'am," Elena replied, maintaining eye contact despite every instinct that told her to look away from the general's penetrating gaze. "The choice to break free from limitations that others have accepted as permanent." Morrison nodded slowly, as if this answer confirmed something she had already suspected. "And have you broken free?" "I'm in the process, ma'am. Every day I work to kill the weak version of myself that accepted those limitations." The person who was afraid, who made excuses, who blamed external circumstances for internal failures. That person is dying, and something stronger is taking her place. Your instructors tell me you're unremarkable, Morrison continued, her tone neutral but her eyes suggesting this was a test rather than a statement of fact. Average physical scores, adequate technical skills, no particular leadership potential. What they don't say, but what I've observed, is that you've improved more in 3 months than most recruits improve in 6. You've also demonstrated tactical thinking and situational awareness that suggests significant untapped potential. Elena remained silent, understanding that the general was building towards something important. Morrison stood and walked to the window that overlooked the training ground where Elena had spent countless hours transforming herself. I'm going to tell you something that very few people know, Morrison said, her back still turned to Elena. 20 years ago, I was where you are now. Different circumstances, different challenges, but the same fundamental situation. I was the woman who didn't belong, who was expected to fail, who was tolerated rather than respected. I had a choice to make: accept the limitations that others had set for me, or destroy the version of myself that had allowed those limitations to exist. The general turned back to face Elena, and, for the first time, her expression showed something beyond professional assessment. There was recognition there, the acknowledgement of a shared understanding that transcended rank and experience. I chose destruction, Morrison continued. I systematically eliminated every weakness, every excuse, every internal voice that told me I wasn't capable of excellence. It was the most difficult thing I've ever done, because it required me to abandon the comfort of being underestimated. When you're expected to fail, failure becomes a form of safety. When you commit to excellence, you lose the luxury of blaming others for your shortcomings. Elena felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition that this conversation was marking a turning point not just in her training but in her entire understanding of what was possible. Morrison was not just sharing her history, she was offering a roadmap for transformation that went far beyond what Elena had imagined for herself. I'm assigning you to a special training program, Morrison announced, returning to her desk and retrieving a sealed envelope. It's designed for individuals who have demonstrated the capacity for exceptional development. The physical and mental demands will be unlike anything you've experienced. Most importantly, it will require you to complete the process you've begun, the systematic destruction of your weak self. Elena accepted the envelope, feeling its weight both literal and symbolic. What should I expect, ma'am? Morrison smiled, but it was not a comforting expression. Expect to discover capabilities you didn't know you possessed. Expect to face challenges that will test every aspect of your character. Expect to emerge as someone completely different from who you are today. And expect that the people who mock you now will speak differently when they see what you've become. What will they call me then, ma'am? The general's smile became something sharper, more predatory. They'll call you whatever you choose to be called. But I suspect that when they see the mark you carry and understand what it represents, they'll simply call you Black Talon. The special training program began 2 weeks later, in a facility that existed in official documents but was discussed by no one who wasn't directly involved in its operations. Elena arrived with a single duffel bag containing the minimal personal items she was permitted to bring, understanding that everything else about her previous existence was being left behind. The transformation that had begun months earlier was about to accelerate beyond anything she had imagined. The facility itself was unremarkable from the outside, a series of concrete buildings surrounded by high fences and guard towers that could have been mistaken for any number of military installations. What set it apart was the intensity of purpose that permeated every aspect of its operation. This was not a place where soldiers were trained according to standard protocols and measured against common benchmarks. This was where exceptional individuals were systematically broken down and rebuilt according to specifications that exceeded normal human limitations. Elena's fellow trainees were unlike anyone she had encountered in her previous military experience. Each had been selected from different branches of service, different specializations, different backgrounds, but all shared the same fundamental characteristic: they had demonstrated the capacity for transformation that went beyond conventional improvement. There was Martinez, a former Navy SEAL who had volunteered for the program after surviving an operation that had killed most of his team. Thompson, an Army Ranger who had been court-martialed for disobeying orders that she believed would result in unnecessary casualties, only to be vindicated when her alternative approach saved dozens of lives. Chen, an Air Force pilot who had crashed behind enemy lines and spent 3 months evading capture while providing intelligence that proved crucial to mission success. What united them was not their previous achievements but their shared understanding that those achievements represented only the beginning of their potential. Each had reached a point where conventional training and traditional military thinking had become limitations rather than tools for growth. They were here because they had chosen to destroy the versions of themselves that had accepted those limitations. The program instructor was Colonel Sarah Kane, a woman whose reputation preceded her into every room she entered. Kane had spent 15 years in special operations, participating in missions that would never be acknowledged officially but had shaped global events in ways that most people would never understand. More relevantly for Elena and her fellow trainees, Kane had undergone the same transformation process that they were about to experience. She had emerged from it as something that existed beyond conventional military classifications, a weapon that thought, planned, and adapted with superhuman efficiency. Kane's first address to the group established the parameters of their new existence. For the next 6 months, you will have no names, no ranks, no personal histories that extend beyond this facility. You will be known by numbers, and those numbers will change based on your performance. Your previous achievements are irrelevant. Your future potential is the only thing that matters. Most importantly, the person you were when you arrived here will cease to exist. That person was limited by assumptions, constrained by conventional thinking, weakened by the need for external validation. That person dies here. The physical training made Elena's previous military experience seem like recreational activity. Days began at 4 in the morning with a 2-hour combat conditioning session that combined strength training, cardiovascular endurance, and fighting techniques from multiple martial arts disciplines. This was followed by tactical simulations that required participants to master new weapon systems, communication protocols, and strategic thinking approaches under conditions of extreme stress and time pressure. But the physical demands were only the foundation for more profound changes. The psychological training was designed to systematically eliminate the mental patterns that limited human performance under extreme conditions. Fear, doubt, hesitation, emotional attachment to outcomes, all of these were treated as enemies to be defeated rather than natural human responses to be managed. Elena learned to recognize the neurological pathways that produced these limitations and to consciously redirect her thinking toward more productive patterns. The most challenging aspect of the program was the isolation from conventional human connections. Trainees were forbidden from forming personal relationships with each other, from discussing their backgrounds or sharing emotional support during difficult periods. This was not cruelty for its own sake but a necessary step in developing the psychological independence that exceptional performance required. Elena had to learn to find strength, motivation, and validation entirely from internal sources. 3 months into the program, Elena underwent an evaluation that would determine whether she continued with advanced training or returned to conventional military service. The test was not announced in advance and took the form of what appeared to be a routine training exercise. Elena and 2 other trainees were assigned a reconnaissance mission that required infiltrating a simulated enemy compound, gathering intelligence, and exfiltrating without detection. The mission went wrong immediately. Intelligence was faulty, security was heavier than expected, and one of her team members was captured within the first hour. Elena found herself alone in hostile territory with compromised objectives and no backup support. The old version of herself would have attempted to complete the original mission despite changed circumstances, or would have retreated to avoid failure. Instead, she adapted. Elena spent 48 hours conducting surveillance of the compound, identifying patterns and weaknesses that had not appeared in the initial briefing. She developed an alternative approach that not only completed the intelligence-gathering objectives but also created an opportunity to rescue her captured teammate. When the exercise concluded, she had gathered twice as much useful intelligence as the original mission had called for, demonstrated tactical flexibility that impressed even the cynical instructors, and shown leadership qualities that had not been evident in her previous evaluations. Colonel Kane called Elena to a private meeting that evening. Unlike her previous encounter with General Morrison, this conversation took place in a Spartan conference room with no decoration or distraction from the business at hand. Kane reviewed Elena's performance metrics on a tablet computer, occasionally nodding or making notes that Elena could not see. "You've completed the first phase of your transformation," Kane announced without preamble. "The weak version of yourself that arrived here has been systematically dismantled. What remains is someone with a foundation for exceptional capabilities. The question now is whether you're prepared for the next level of development." Elena understood that this was another pivotal moment, similar to her conversation with General Morrison but operating at a deeper level. "What does the next level involve, ma'am?" Kane set down her tablet and studied Elena with the kind of focused attention that made most people uncomfortable. "It involves becoming something that operates beyond conventional human limitations. Not superhuman, that's fantasy. But someone who has eliminated the psychological and emotional constraints that prevent most people from accessing their full potential. It requires a level of self-knowledge and self-control that very few people are willing to develop." "Because it's difficult?" "Because it's permanent," Kane replied. "Once you complete this transformation, you can't go back to being someone who makes excuses, who accepts limitations, who needs external validation to function effectively. You become someone who operates at a level of competence that others find intimidating or incomprehensible. Your relationships, your career, your entire existence will be fundamentally different from what normal people experience." Elena considered this carefully. She thought about the girl who had watched her father surrender to his limitations, about the recruit who had endured months of mockery while systematically improving her capabilities, about the person she had been becoming throughout this process. The choice was not really a choice at all, it was the logical next step in a journey that had begun long before she arrived at this facility. "I want to continue," she said. Kane nodded, as if this answer had been expected. "Then, you need to understand what you're committing to. The advanced program will push you beyond anything you've experienced. You'll learn to function effectively under conditions that would incapacitate most trained soldiers. You'll develop tactical and strategic thinking capabilities that will make you invaluable in complex operational environments. Most importantly, you'll complete the process of destroying your weak self and replacing it with something that cannot be broken by external circumstances." Elena felt the familiar sensation of standing at the edge of a precipice, about to take a step that would change everything about her existence. But, unlike previous moments of transformation, this one carried no fear or uncertainty. The person who had been afraid of change had already been systematically eliminated. "When do I start?" Kane smiled, and, for the first time since Elena had met her, the expression seemed genuinely pleased rather than merely professional. "You start by understanding that you've already begun. Everything you've experienced here has been preparation for what comes next. The question isn't when you start, it's whether you're ready to finish what you began when you decided to destroy your weak self." That night, Elena lay in her narrow bunk and reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months earlier, she had been someone who endured mockery and worked quietly toward goals that seemed barely achievable. Now she was someone being offered the opportunity to transcend normal human limitations entirely. The transformation had been so gradual and so thorough that she barely recognized the person she had been. The black Talon tattoo on her shoulder blade seemed to burn with significance as she thought about what Colonel Kane had told her. The mark had originally represented her choice to break free from the limitations that had defined her past. Now it was becoming something more, a symbol of transformation that went beyond what she had originally imagined possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to test the capabilities she was developing, new steps in the process of becoming someone who could not be defeated by external circumstances because she had already defeated the internal weaknesses that made such defeat possible. Elena closed her eyes and felt not excitement or anxiety about what lay ahead, but a calm certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be, becoming exactly who she was meant to become. The mockery that had once defined how others saw her now seemed like something from another lifetime, experienced by someone else entirely. She understood now that the people who had dismissed and underestimated her had been responding to the weak version of herself that no longer existed. When they encountered who she was becoming, their responses would be very different. They would speak her name with respect, or they would not speak it at all. The advanced phase of training began with an exercise in complete sensory deprivation that lasted for 72 hours. Elena was placed in a sealed chamber with no light, no sound, and minimal air circulation, with only water and basic nutrition provided at irregular intervals. The purpose was not punishment but education, learning to maintain mental clarity and emotional stability when deprived of the external stimuli that most people rely on for psychological orientation. For the first 12 hours, Elena experienced the predictable responses: disorientation, anxiety, and the desperate urge to escape the confines of the chamber. The old version of herself would have focused on these discomforts, allowing them to dominate her mental landscape and gradually erode her psychological stability. Instead, she treated them as information to be processed and then dismissed. The discomfort was real but temporary. The anxiety was natural but unproductive. The urge to escape was understandable but irrelevant to her current situation. By the second day, something shifted. Elena discovered that without external distractions, her mind could access levels of focus and clarity that had been impossible in normal environments. She began using the isolation not as something to endure but as an opportunity to examine and refine her thinking processes. She reviewed tactical scenarios from memory, practiced mental exercises that improved her ability to process complex information quickly, and, most importantly, continued the work of systematically identifying and eliminating the remaining traces of her weak self. When the chamber door finally opened and Elena emerged, Colonel Kane was waiting with a stopwatch and a clipboard. Elena's vital signs were recorded, her physical condition assessed, and her psychological state evaluated through a series of questions and exercises. What the assessment revealed was that Elena had not merely survived the isolation, she had used it productively, emerging in better mental condition than when she had entered. Most people experience significant psychological deterioration after extended sensory deprivation, Kane observed as she reviewed Elena's test results. You seem to have experienced the opposite effect. Your cognitive functions are actually improved from baseline measurements. How do you explain that? Elena considered her response carefully. I used the time to eliminate distractions and focus on mental conditioning. Without external stimuli competing for my attention, I could work more efficiently on improving my internal processes. Kane made notes on her clipboard, nodding slowly. That response suggests you've internalized one of the most important principles of advanced performance, the ability to find opportunity in circumstances that others experience as obstacles. This capacity will be essential for the next phase of your development. The training that followed tested every aspect of Elena's transformed capabilities. She was required to master advanced weapons systems that most soldiers never encountered, to develop fluency in multiple languages that would allow her to operate in diverse cultural environments, and to learn complex technical skills that ranged from advanced medical procedures to sophisticated electronic surveillance techniques. Each new competency was introduced under conditions of extreme time pressure and physical stress, requiring her to demonstrate not just the ability to learn quickly but to retain and apply new knowledge while functioning at the edge of her physical and mental capabilities. More challenging than the individual skills was learning to integrate them into a coherent operational framework. Elena was not being trained to be a specialist in any particular area but to be someone capable of adapting to any situation that might arise in complex operational environments. This required developing a level of mental flexibility and situational awareness that went far beyond what conventional military training provided. The psychological training continued to evolve as well. Elena learned to recognize and counter various forms of psychological manipulation, to maintain operational effectiveness while enduring physical and emotional trauma, and to make critical decisions under conditions of incomplete information and extreme time pressure. Perhaps most importantly, she learned to function as a leader in situations where traditional command structures had broken down or where she was operating without external support or guidance. 4 months into the advanced program, Elena was assigned her first real-world mission. The details were classified at levels that exceeded her current clearance, but the basic parameters were straightforward: infiltrate a terrorist organization that was planning an attack on civilian targets, gather intelligence on their operational capabilities and timeline, and exfiltrate with information that would allow military forces to prevent the attack. The mission required Elena to assume a false identity and spend several weeks embedded with dangerous individuals who would kill her without hesitation if they discovered her true purpose. She would be operating alone, with no backup support and no communication with her handlers except through predetermined emergency protocols. Success would depend entirely on her ability to apply everything she had learned about advanced performance under conditions of genuine mortal danger. Elena approached the mission with the same systematic methodology that she had applied to every aspect of her transformation. She studied the target organization exhaustively, memorizing details about their leadership, operational methods, and ideological motivations. She practiced her cover identity until it became a second nature, developing the mannerisms, speech patterns, and cultural knowledge that would allow her to blend seamlessly into their environment. Most importantly, she prepared mentally for the psychological challenges of maintaining her mission focus while surrounded by people whose actions were fundamentally repugnant to her moral values. The infiltration went flawlessly. Elena's cover identity held up under scrutiny, and, within days she had gained the trust of key figures within the organization. Her training in psychological manipulation and social engineering allowed her to gather intelligence with remarkable efficiency, identifying not only the immediate threat that had prompted her mission but several additional planned attacks that were not yet known to intelligence services. The challenge came when Elena discovered that the organization's timeline had been accelerated due to external pressure from law enforcement agencies. The attack was scheduled to occur days earlier than intelligence estimates had suggested, and she had less than 48 hours to gather the final details needed to prevent it while maintaining her cover and ensuring her own survival. The old version of Elena would have been overwhelmed by the compressed timeline and the life-or-death consequences of failure. Instead, she adapted. Working with the enhanced cognitive abilities that her training had developed, she rapidly revised her approach to intelligence gathering, taking calculated risks that allowed her to obtain crucial information more quickly while minimizing her exposure to discovery. When the situation required her to participate in activities that conflicted with her moral values to maintain her cover, she found ways to minimize harm while preserving the mission's integrity. Elena exfiltrated successfully with intelligence that allowed military forces to prevent not only the immediate attack but 3 additional operations that would have resulted in hundreds of civilian casualties. Her mission report became a case study in advanced operational techniques, demonstrating capabilities that impressed even the most experienced special operations commanders. More importantly for Elena's development, the mission had tested her transformation under genuine combat conditions and confirmed that the person she had become could function effectively in circumstances that would have destroyed her earlier self. She had proven that the systematic destruction of her weak self had been complete and that what remained was someone capable of exceptional performance under any conditions. Colonel Kane called Elena to a final evaluation meeting 3 weeks after her return from the mission. This time, the setting was Kane's personal office rather than an impersonal conference room, suggesting that this conversation would be different from their previous interactions. Kane reviewed Elena's mission reports and performance evaluations in silence for several minutes before setting the documents aside and focusing her full attention on Elena. 6 months ago, you arrived here as someone with potential that exceeded conventional military classifications, Kane began. Today, you're someone who has realized that potential in ways that very few people ever achieve. The question now is what you want to do with the capabilities you've developed. Elena understood that this was not just a career counseling session but a moment that would define the trajectory of her entire future. What are the options, ma'am? Kane leaned back in her chair, studying Elena with the same penetrating attention that had characterized all of their interactions. You could return to conventional military service, where your enhanced capabilities would make you an exceptional soldier and leader. You could join one of the special operations units that handle the most challenging missions. Or you could continue with even more advanced training that would prepare you for operations that exist beyond normal military classification. What kind of operations? The kind that prevent wars rather than fighting them. The kind that neutralize threats before they become visible to conventional intelligence agencies. The kind that requires someone who can operate independently for extended periods while making decisions that affect global security. The kind that requires someone who has completely transcended normal human limitations and can function as a strategic asset rather than just a tactical one. Elena felt the familiar sensation of standing at the edge of another transformative moment, but this time it carried additional weight. The choice she made now would determine not just her career but her entire identity for the rest of her life. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the mocked recruit who had endured derision while systematically improving her capabilities to someone being offered opportunities that most people could never imagine. "I want to continue," she said, and her voice carried the certainty of someone who had already destroyed every part of herself that might have chosen differently. Kane nodded, as if this answer had been expected but was nonetheless gratifying to hear. "Then, you should understand what that means. You'll be working on operations that will never be acknowledged officially. Your achievements will be measured in disasters that don't happen, wars that don't start, and threats that never materialize. You'll operate under deep cover for months or years at a time, often with no contact with your handlers and no external validation for your work. Most importantly, you'll be someone who exists beyond conventional human categories, not superhuman, but someone who has eliminated the limitations that prevent most people from accessing their full potential." Elena considered this carefully, understanding that Kane was describing not just a career choice but a way of existence that would set her apart from normal human experience permanently. But the person who might have been intimidated by such isolation had been systematically destroyed months ago. What remained was someone who found strength and purpose in challenges that would overwhelm others. "When do I start?" Kane smiled, and this time the expression carried genuine warmth rather than professional assessment. "You start by understanding that your transformation is complete. The weak version of yourself that arrived here has been entirely replaced by someone capable of exceptional performance under any circumstances. The person who was mocked and underestimated no longer exists. What remains is someone who will be spoken of with respect, fear, and admiration, depending on which side of an operation they find themselves on." That evening, Elena stood alone in the facility's training ground where she had spent countless hours perfecting the capabilities that now defined her. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the young woman who had watched her father surrender to his limitations to someone who had been offered the opportunity to operate at levels that exceeded normal human classification. The black Talon tattoo on her shoulder blade had evolved in meaning throughout her transformation. Originally a symbol of her choice to break free from accepted limitations, it had become a mark of completed transformation, evidence that she had successfully destroyed her weak self and replaced it with something capable of transcending normal human constraints. Elena understood now that the mockery she had endured during her initial training had been a gift rather than an obstacle. It had forced her to find strength and motivation entirely from internal sources, preparing her for the psychological independence that exceptional performance required. The people who had dismissed and underestimated her had unknowingly contributed to the process that had made her current capabilities possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to apply the advanced skills she had developed, new missions that would test her abilities under conditions that would incapacitate most trained operatives. But Elena felt no anxiety about what lay ahead, only the calm confidence of someone who had systematically eliminated every internal limitation that might have prevented success. She had become Black Talon not just as a call sign or operational designation, but as a complete transformation of identity. The weak self that had once accepted the limitations imposed by others was gone forever. What remained was someone who could not be destroyed by external circumstances because she had already destroyed everything within herself that such circumstances could target. The general would speak her name now, but it would be spoken with respect rather than dismissal, with recognition of capabilities rather than doubt about potential. More importantly, Elena no longer needed anyone to speak her name at all. She had become someone whose worth was measured not by external validation but by internal standards that exceeded anything others might impose. The transformation was complete, and the person who had emerged from it was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.